Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Once again, as we welcome you to In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi, on this Wednesday evening. And we are now switching focus in the second half of this evening's broadcast to what has been playing out with regard to the ceasefire. Now, we've heard the United States Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, talking yesterday that Operation Epic Fury which commenced in February, has now they've achieved their objectives, and now they prefer a path to peace. Now, can we read? How much do we read into the statement with Operation Fury ending? Is the war against Iran over? And this is what we are discussing with my panel of guests this evening. We are joined by Dr. Ali Al Sayed, who is a Middle East political scholar and analyst as well. And hopefully we should get hold of Ali Raza Kamandi, who is a Tehran-based journalist. And also we're going to be joined by Professor Junaid Ahmed, and he has been featured very prominently on Salam Media previously as well, a scholar of law, religion, global politics, and he'll be joining us shortly as well. But let's go across now to join my guests, who is already waiting with us, Dr. Ali Al Sayed, from joining us out of Doha this evening. Dr. Ali, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairan so much for your time and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
And Prof. Junaid Ahmed, great seeing you again. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum to you and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, Dr. Ali, let's begin and let's just go let's dive straight into the discussion. The announcement made by Marco Rubio that Operation Epic Fury has ended, but the question mark that relates is, does this actually signal the end of the war? Because we know at this point in time, we are witnessing a very fragile ceasefire, and many are wondering and asking this question, could the war be officially over?
3 points I'd say in response to what Marco Rubio has said, which is number one, Trump has said this in the past, a few days ago actually. He referred to the ending of the operation of Epic Fury and essentially argued that the goals have been achieved, even though respectfully or not so respectfully, none of the goals have been achieved. The US is actually worse off than how they started in the war. Before the war started, February 27th, 2026, Iran did not have control over the Strait of Hormuz, or Iran did not have a poll booth. Iran did not expand the borders of the Strait of Hormuz all the way to Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates, which is another part of the discussion, which I'll get to back to later. When we speak about Marco Rubio's statement, we should understand it within the context of the US political system and especially their legal system. There's something called the War Resolution Powers Act, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm paraphrasing it. It was created in 1973, and what it does is it tries to put limits on the president's power to engage in war without congressional approval. And what it says is essentially, if the United States does start a war and if the president starts a war without congressional approval, he needs to end that war within 60 days. And when Marco Rubio says this, it's his way of going or exploiting that legal loophole in order to say that in the future, if the United States needs to resume the conflict, he can always argue that Trump can always argue that effectively this is a new battle, this is a new project. This is not an extension of Epic Fury. This is actually something else with another set of objectives. So this is their way of kind of moving around the legal obstacles that they're going to face if they decide to continue this war. On the other hand, when we look at what's happening on the ground, unfortunately, I don't see anything that has really changed between now and a week ago. The US is still maximalist in what is demanding in negotiations. Iran is also maximalist in what they're demanding in the negotiations. And at the moment, the only thing that has really deferred is the media reporting on this somehow an agreement coming to fruition within the next couple of days or hours, which I think is not grounded in any real analysis of what has been happening on the ground. And we can get into that a lot more later, and I'll stop it there for now.
We certainly will, Dr. Ali. And, clearly, Professor Junaid, I think just looking at it from your perspective as well, as, when we see the on again, off again talks, and this has actually become somewhat of a pattern with Donald Trump. And early on, before you came on, and just before we came live on air as well, I was having a chat with Dr. Ali and talking about the contradictions and the contradictory messaging that has come through from the likes of the United States of America as well, and also in terms of the language that has been used to describe what has been playing out since February, since the attack on Iran had taken place. They talk about Operation Epic Fury ended, but now we see this about turn on the part of Donald Trump talking about Operation Freedom. Now, one obviously needs to try and make sense about what all of this actually means.
Well, brother Inayat, I think that as we've discussed before, that what with Trump and the Trump administration, the masks are off, and whatever attempts by previous presidents to justify invasions and occupations and coups, regime changes, sanctions, they were always done with some type of a humanitarian justification. We're going in there for human rights, women's rights, democracy, and freedom. Even though all of those characters were war criminals, especially George Bush Jr. With Trump, he's just completely dispensed with any idea of we're going to do anything positive for these countries. I mean, you guys know very well in Venezuela, we're here for their oil. So this is the problem with Trump. The problem, and in some ways, the benefit is that he's just so raw and he's so indifferent to the tragedy and the slaughter that American weapons may cause directly or indirectly, say through Israel. But at the same time, he kind of lets the world see that, all right, this is the United States that many of us were saying existed, but there's such a successful, not just American, global propaganda system that tried to convince people, even of the global South, that, for all of its flaws, the United States still is the beacon of democracy and freedom. This is all collapsed in front of our eyes. And I think that when it comes to this, the what's going on right now, the war, I mean, that tells us everything. When was the last time the United States had gone to a war and within 40 days is ready, not just ready. I mean, we, the Iranians, everyone knows, are desperate to get at the negotiating table. This has never happened. The United States can be losing from year after year for 2 decades, say in Afghanistan, and then they'll say goodbye. There's something qualitatively different that's going on here, and I think there is a recognition that this time they may have overplayed their hand, and we don't at this stage. All I'll say is that what we see, these schizophrenic responses by Donald Trump every day, it's a man who is trying to look for an off ramp, but at the same time has Netanyahu in Israel with a gun to his head, to put it very candidly.
Perfect. Jazakallah for that, Prof. Junaid. Dr. Ali, I think the one word that Prof. Junaid used is desperation. And at this point in time, looking at what has played out since the end of February, since the attack on Iran, and again, Prof. Junaid also alluded to Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu as well. And this is obviously put Trump in somewhat of a dilemma, which has made him also a loose cannon, for want of a better term, because he says one thing one day, he says something else the other day. To what extent is Trump, and we've heard of this term off ramp for quite a few weeks now, how desperate is Donald Trump as far in getting this off ramp and to get out of the dilemma or the mess that both him and Benjamin Netanyahu has created?
That's a great question. And in order for me to unpack this, let's talk first of all about what's happening on the ground in the United States when it comes to Trump's approval rating. It's in the historic low margins. We're talking about 33, 34% approval ratings. We're talking about those who were ideologically committed to Trump breaking off, breaking away. Of course, there is still a subsection, or maybe we can say a majority of MAGA that are still with Trump. But in order for Trump to lose his standing, to lose his leadership position within the Republican Party and within the US political system, we only need around 20% of MAGA to break off from the movement in order for Trump to lose. And that is the fact of the matter. Trump is desperate because essentially this war has increasingly become unpopular. MAGA Republicans have constantly tried to defend Trump, even when he goes against his prior ideological commitments, such as not starting new wars or not engaging in forever wars. But they are constantly seeing the prices in the United States when it comes to gas or food constantly going up, contrary to what he said. You know, maybe they could have, on the one hand, for a little while, said, you know, maybe what Trump is doing is right. Maybe he should have started this war. But when they see the reality on the ground and how their livelihoods are being deteriorated, this is leading quite clearly to the fall of Trump to his own base. And we're not even talking about the Democratic base. Obviously, they are very resentful of Donald Trump. So he is desperate to find a way to end this war with a win. And it's not going to be enough for Trump to just say that, to create a narrative that he has won. This time it's different. There is a reality on the ground. There is also the question of the US global empire. It's bigger than Trump now. For the US to lose this war, and whether it's losing it by getting the shorthand of the negotiations, the results of the negotiations, or that they are stuck in a quagmire, this is going to lead to the destruction of this image of US global hegemony. It's going to result in what I think an unrevocable or unsolvable problem for the image of US hegemony. We're going to go closer into a multipolar system. And if I may add, before I conclude, part of the reason is that, you know, aside from that he's, overplayed his hand, the deeper issue is that we can't understand what Donald Trump and the United States are doing in the context of this war, because everything that they have been doing has been against US national interest. It has been in the interest, though, of very limited, specific lobby groups, which include the oil lobby, the arms lobby, and most prominently, obviously, the Zionist lobby. And we know that Israel has a vested interest in prolonging this war. And I think with every movement that has been happening, we're getting closer to the war actually getting into a more precarious position. And for war to continue, I am unfortunately very skeptical of all of these reports of a negotiated settlement coming soon, and we'll build upon that as we speak more.
Yes. Also, I think, Professor Junaid, I think from what Dr. Ali is saying as well is, you know, obviously this comes against the backdrop of growing anti-war public opinion in the United States of America. And the fact that this war has taken place, at a time when we've seen the genocide unfolding in Gaza as well, and we've seen public opinion also in the United States of America and right across the entire world, changing, and the fact that America obviously has been actively supporting Israel throughout this genocide as well. So Trump obviously has got a very short attention span for want of a better term. And I think, this obviously is coming to haunt him. It's coming to bite him. And the fact that Iran has actually stood its ground is something that he least expected. He was hoping for a quick, easy win. It didn't happen.
Right, which was ludicrous from the beginning. This is what everyone is saying, that Netanyahu came, convinced Trump that, oh, this is just going to be another Venezuela operation. You take out the leader, and the people will rise up and they will support you. I mean, it was completely laughable, but supposedly Trump fell for it. And I think that's important to realize, that this project by Israel, and specifically Netanyahu, to get an American president to invade Iran, has been there since 2001, maybe even before. So we should also recognize there have been American presidents that have resisted that pressure. I mean, if we remember back in the Iraq War, the Israelis really wanted to go after Iran, and then the general said that, look, we can't even get our act together in Iraq or Afghanistan, and you want us to go. So this has been there. Trump has been the most foolish one to have accepted this, but that is also what I'm implying. We don't have the full evidence right now, but it does seem like he's an incredibly compromised character, and we should realize as well, Trump has had two assassination attempts on his life. We should remember that as well. So it's a very personalized presidency when we speak about Donald Trump, and I like the fact that a friend Ali was speaking about the internal dynamics of the United States. And one of the things that many of us are really enjoying is the internal civil war going on within MAGA. Again, so many people saying this is supposed to be MAGA, not MIGA, make Israel great again. But whether it was the Epstein files that Trump promised he would completely reveal, whether it was ICE, where these paramilitary forces that were supposed to go after brown and black people, but mistakenly shot two white people, and now this war. So it's an absolute betrayal of everything Trump promised his base. The inflation, it's getting worse. Gas prices, it's getting worse. This was the bargain. Trump said that, look, if you will agree with to be racist and Islamophobic, at least I'll give you better economic conditions. Well, the second half of that bargain hasn't worked. And so, and the fact, last thing is the Israel question. Ordinary people in this country, Democrat and especially Republicans, had no idea of the close relationship of the United States and Israel. So, so first they find that out. Secondly, they also find out, wait a second, our weapons and arms are being used to kill babies and families and commit genocide. So even these people that normally may be Islamophobic and so on, even they have some shred of humanity within them. So this is very interesting situation. I often say and pray that Donald Trump may be the last Zionist president of the United States. Let's see, inshallah.
Well, inshallah. Dr. Ali, just, looking at where the negotiations are at this point in time. And, we spoke about the off-ramp, but again, Donald Trump is Donald Trump. But again, just looking at it from an Iranian perspective, and how do you read, or how do you, analyze the Iranian perspective and what Iran actually wants out of the ceasefire deal, and to end, obviously, the war, and more importantly, to end the blockade as well?
On the one hand, what has to be admitted, to be honest, between the Iranians and the US, the Iranians are the ones that are actually the more realistic ones when it comes to negotiating based off of the reality of who has leverage. Iran has leverage over the United States because of the constant US blunders. Trump, when he started this blockade, was his way to try to get an extra card with him to the table in order to have a better position within the negotiations. It was a moment of desperation, and Iran effectively said, we're not, we know that you're not bluffing, but we know that we are going to last for longer than you. Indeed, the Iranian economy has been hit hard by the blockade. We can see that the Toman has went down to historic lows. We can see that the GDP has went down to also historic lows. But when we see the cost that the strait closure has on the US, on Trump specifically, within the context of the US, I think the Iranians have been assessing that they can last longer than the United States. Is it straight? Who's going to win? Straight closure or blockade? The Iranians are betting on straight closure, and I think many political economists would also say so as well, and a lot of scholars as well, such as John Mearsheimer, Trita Parsi, even Vali Nasser. What I think Donald Trump was trying to do with his Operation Freedom, where he said that he was going to free the ships, it was quite clear he was not going to be able to free the ships, because it's very easy to target those ships on the Iranian side by the usage of drones. But what Donald Trump was trying to do, I think, was to intimidate Iran. He clearly constantly does not understand or learn from his mistakes when it comes to dealing with Iran. He engages in negotiations with Iran only to think that he can get an upper hand by engaging in more intimidation and aggression, and Iran constantly call his bluff. Iran constantly find a way to circumvent the effects of those threats and those intimidations. And what we see is, in response, what the Iranians did after Trump decided to do his Operation Freedom was they attacked Fujairah, the UAE port that is on the far east of the UAE, that actually bypasses the Strait of Hormuz. And this is really crucial, because this ties into what I was talking about earlier about the UAE leaving OPEC. When the UAE left OPEC, part of the reason was, of course, there was this historical grievance that they have with that organization, but also they wanted to increase their output. And what happens then when they increase their oil output is that this helps mitigate the amount of damage that's happening right now to the global oil markets. It will allow the oil markets, or the price of oil, to go down. This is in U.S. interest, because it allows to alleviate that amount of pressure that they're dealing with when it comes to increasing gas prices. What Iran did, and the only way that the UAE can export those that oil, is through the Fujairah port. Obviously, the oil pipeline that reaches from the inner UAE to Fujairah is not big enough to allow for 5 million barrels of oil to be exported per day, but there is certainly this plan to expand it, right? And what the Iran basically did was, essentially, they closed off the Fujairah port. They said, no, you're not exporting any more oil from over there. And so they widened the border of the Strait of Hormuz, their control over the Strait of Hormuz. So they actually responded very effectively to the US's Operation Freedom. And it doesn't seem like the US has any smart responses at the moment. And we can see this also within what Iran is demanding within the negotiations. Iran is first demanding that the first phase of the negotiations be centered on their control over the Strait of Hormuz, not their ballistic missiles, not their proxies, not their nuclear program. Essentially, they are saying now that you want to talk, let's talk about our control over the Strait of Hormuz. And then later we can have a discussion about our nuclear program, our enriched uranium, what we're going to do with it. And then they said that they are later in phase 3 going to talk about creating a security arrangement with the Arab states that are neighboring it. And this shows how much of a loss the US has been dealt within the context of negotiations. Even the proxies and the ballistic missile program are not even anywhere near what they're going to discuss about. And that is something that Trump also had in mind when this war first started, which is to to destroy their ballistic missile program, and also to stop their outreach through their proxies in the region.
Yes, Dr. Ali. Also, Professor Junaid, what we've seen also is a total disconnect, where on the one hand, you've got negotiations taking place and you've got Trump negotiating with himself via X. And, we've seen all the comments that have made. And I think there was one that stood out now, the latest one saying that if they don't agree, they'll end up agreeing shortly thereafter. Now, Trump has got this habit of issuing these challenges and these, making these baseless statements, and we've seen it happening over and over again, where what Dr. Ali is saying that Iran is talking about something very tangible. They are focused on that Strait of Hormuz at this point in time. Everything else doesn't matter. And this is where, when one looks at the effect or the ripple effect globally, because of the Strait of Hormuz, and I think this is what the rest of the world wants as well. And this is the reason why, when Trump was looking for allies, not Britain, not Germany, not France, none of the Europeans, not NATO, had actually supported Donald Trump. And again, it's the almighty petrodollar is seen under threat as well. We've seen China in the play, the Chinese currency. All of this is playing out again. And when Dr. Ali speaks about leverage, these are all important, critical areas of leverage that Iran has actually used to good effect.
Yeah, I mean, I love the what you said earlier. This is the most apt description that Donald Trump is effectively negotiating with himself. That's what we see in every single tweet or post of his. It's like he is not speaking to anyone, Iranians, Pakistanis. He'll say occasionally, "Well, the Pakistanis convinced me to extend the ceasefire." We know what that's about. We were speaking earlier about Trump and an off ramp, but like I said, there are these multiple pressures on him, especially the Zionist lobby, which will not allow him an off ramp, even if he wants that. I mean, the second thing is we should also remember that the individuals that Trump is sending for these negotiations, the two Zionist Israeli assets, Witkoff and Kirshner, his son-in-law, and his golf buddy, real estate buddy. And this look at. I mean, it's shameless to continue to send these characters who are now well known for sabotaging, subverting any negotiations, and in the middle of them, often calling on strikes. So these guys go. The Iranians think that maybe JD Vance is a little bit more sensible, a little less anti-war. But even on that front, Trump will say that, yeah, he's on a plane. He's going to invite land in Islamabad. He's sitting right there in D.C. So these are when we speak about the negotiations themselves, there's a reason why the Iranians, they'll come to Pakistan and then they'll go to Russia, so on. They have no partners from the American side to speak to. They have no serious people to speak to about whether it's nuclear enrichment, uranium enrichment, or whatever the case may be. They do not have that power. So this is why, and coming back to your point, the Iranian foreign minister, brief stop in Pakistan, then where does he go? To Russia. And when you go to Russia, in some ways, you also go to China, because that's what we need to remember. Iran is such a central actor in the Belt and Road Initiative of China. That is the whole Eurasian initiative, which is why they will never let Iran fall. Of course, Iran doesn't really even need the help right now. You'll notice that Trump constantly says, well, you Asian countries, China, Japan, you're getting screwed in this process. Go and free your ships, and they're not complaining. They're not saying anything. So it's quite ridiculous right now the way the United States is putting this blockade on another blockade. But I also think this is very much symptomatic of both the United States, and actually even more than the United States, its pet project, its attack dog in the Middle East, Israel. This seems like it is the final phase of Israel, which is why we see it's unhinged, unrestrained violence here and there. But I think that that's a symptom of hopefully this being the final phase of the Zionist project.
Dr. Ali, I think if there's a lesson that I think we can take and the world can actually take is a lesson in diplomacy. And I think Professor Junaid alluded to the foreign minister of Iran. And he's featured very, very prominently. And when we talk about a lesson in diplomacy, I think Iran obviously has played certain cards very, very well, particularly when it came to the negotiations in Pakistan, and also in terms of how Iran is actually dealing with many other countries around the world.
So when it comes to the question of diplomacy, and I'd like to build upon something that Professor Junaid was referring to, and rightly so, which is that the Iranian foreign minister can constantly be seen going to Russia and China. And I think part of the reason for this is Iran has not made it a secret that they would also like an end to the war. War does not benefit any side in the world aside from Israel, obviously, because of their expansionist project. You can't expand in a region that is strong and stable. So Israel is the only country, I think, in the world that benefits from a war like this. But putting this aside, is that Iran has been constantly demanding for security guarantees, and the security guarantee means nothing when it comes to the United States writing something on a piece of paper. They need Russia and China as those big actors within the United Nations Security Council, as these massive poles within what is becoming an increasingly multipolar world system, to have a say in this security guarantee. They have to be upholders of the security guarantee. And what this says about diplomacy at the moment is that it is not enough for Iran and the United States to come together to try to find a solution. There need to be other actors that are part of that discussion. And at the moment, Russia and China seem like they're very well posed to have a say within this new, or a proposal for a new security apparatus or system that makes sure that a war doesn't occur again. I think also at the same time, what is important to note is that there will be an unstable, and still, I think, problems will arise within the Gulf region if the voices of the Gulf states is not represented. And at the moment, I think that this has led to a lot of problems when it comes to finding a solution, a workable solution moving forward. You can't have a deal that just includes Iran, Russia, China, and the United States, while also ignoring other countries that are in that same region that also coexist in that region. And I think that will be also crucial in order for diplomacy to actually create a workable solution that is able to safeguard everybody in the future and prevent wars and increase cooperation, especially when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, and obviously engaging in more trust building measures so that this region can become more stable and more secure moving forward in the future, which I think ultimately benefits Iran, it benefits the Gulf, it benefits the United States, China, and Russia in a lot of ways. And it allows us to safeguard ourselves. It allows us to deter and counterbalance the Israeli project, and it will allow us to be a crucial factor that allows us to participate in what Professor Junaid has argued, which is participating in the final phase of seeing out this final phase of Israel. Without that, I don't think that there will be a final phase when it comes to Israel. With that, I think we will be able to be active actors in making sure that the final phase of Israel actually comes to fruition, and we can move past it and onto a more just future for this region.
Well, certainly. Also, Dr. Ali, I actually want to just revisit what you said about the voices of the Gulf countries that need to be heard as well, and they need to be represented. We'll come to that now. But just before that, Prof. Junaid, it is clear that Donald Trump has got Netanyahu's ear, and also through all these negotiations, and if the ceasefire does occur as well, the fact that Netanyahu dragged Donald Trump into this war as well, and just looking at someone like Netanyahu, he's hell bent on the destruction of Iran. He's destroyed Gaza. We see what's happening in Palestine, in the West Bank, and basically with someone like Netanyahu as well, sometimes one actually begins to question or wonder whether there is any hope as long as you have somebody like Benjamin Netanyahu. And he obviously, Trump has his ear.
Right. At the risk of offending Norman Finkelstein, I do think that obviously Netanyahu and the Israeli lobby play an inordinate role in American foreign policy towards the Middle East. At the same time, I do not want to absolve Trump and the American administration for effectively supporting a genocide which could never take place without that American support. So that that's the first thing. The other thing is that it is becoming, I think, a bit mistaken to just see this the whole project of Greater Israel, of Israeli violence and terror, as just the result of a Netanyahu. I think that by this stage, it's become crystal clear, both during the genocide in Gaza, now the war against Iran and Lebanon, you have an overwhelming majority of Israelis that support this. It's very sad. It's very unfortunate. My Jewish friends, they lament this fact. They cry over this, that this Jewish state and society, what has happened to it. And so I think that this is, in some ways, this is what makes everything so much more complicated, because it is not just Netanyahu. In fact, you know that even in his cabinet right now, you have people even far further to the right of Netanyahu himself. So this is a situation that you're dealing with now. In terms of Trump, I think that at some point, I think the point was raised earlier. One of the interesting things of this war, as opposed to any other war, certainly in my lifetime, is right from the get go, the majority of the American population was against this war. That's never happened before because usually the propaganda system works. It is able to sell that war, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, any war. But this time it's not. And you can see that reflected in Democratic Party politicians, otherwise who are spineless and don't do anything. But they had to kind of respond to a base, which in the first instance was horrified what was going on in Gaza and now are very much anti-war. So one thing that we have to realize is that there are divisions right now. There are serious divisions taking place in the American ruling elite, and we come back to, as was mentioned, John Mearsheimer, and who's obviously spoken about the role of the Israel lobby, that at some stage you can imagine sections of the American political and military establishment saying that this country that we're supporting, this is not an asset, this is a huge liability.
Well, certainly. Dr. Ali, let's just get back to the issue surrounding the voices of the Gulf countries and the neighbors of Iran that need to be represented. And we can also possibly extend this discussion. And I know you spoke about the multipolar world, but also looking at it from an Islamic world, and whether we're looking at organizations like the OIC or the Arab League as well. Because, what we've seen is there are great lessons, and I'm sure the Gulf countries have learned some bitter lessons as far as America is concerned, because they've been hard hit. The American bases have been hit very, very hard. We've seen now, as a result, in, as you mentioned, although it may be not directly related, a fracturing of the Gulf with a country like the UAE pulling out of OPEC or OPEC plus. Are we, just how united should the Gulf countries be at this point in time? And you mentioned it's in their interest, it's in the interest of Iran as well to obviously mend relations, and also in terms of progress, in terms of the economies as well. So, how do you see this actually playing out in the greater Persian Gulf region and also the Muslim world in general?
So I'll start with the first part of that question, which is how unified should the Gulf be moving forward? And I think that they should be more unified in terms of their foreign, economic, and defense policy than they are at the moment. And I've made this clear in the past through my own public statements with regards to this idea of having what I would call a Gulf Union or a confederal system of Gulf states, wherein we move away from this system of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, where we have this institution where we come together in order to discuss matters that are of mutual interest and concern, but not come up with a binding solution. I think at this moment in time, what is going to allow to safeguard the Gulf in the future with regards to them being independent, being self-sufficient, not depending on what has truly shown to be a duplicitous United States for its own security, for its own stability. You know, we should, I think, and I definitely think that there's a strong case for this, and there are a lot of voices on the academic, the Gulf academic spectrum that are constantly also calling for a mechanism of this sort or another, where we have a unified national security policy, a unified economic policy, and a unified foreign policy. It's clear that these U.S. bases have not protected us, and there needs to be some sort of a strategy moving forward wherein those U.S. bases are changed, transformed into Gulf bases, wherein there is this unified army that is able to protect the Gulf. And where we have this unified economic policy when it comes to oil and gas prices, and especially, you know, a unified foreign policy when it comes to Israel, when it comes to the United States, when it comes to any negotiations with Iran. And I emphasize upon this because unity through strength within the context of negotiations is better than each state going to the negotiations as an individual state. You know, coming together as this unified bloc, going to negotiate with Iran over passage through the Strait of Hormuz gives us a lot more cards to use within the context of negotiations. It allows us to essentially have a stronger say as to how the negotiations will go moving forward. It allows us to have a stronger response to when, you know, Iran, whether people like it or not, Iran has engaged in inexcusable attacks against civilian infrastructure in the Gulf. And we're talking about facilities that are vital for innocent civilian lives, such as water desalination plants, electricity facilities. And them also, on another hand, giving weapons or drones rather to Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. And we know very well that these militias actually violate Iraq's sovereignty. They cause destruction, instability, and insecurity in Iraq. And they have been given drones by Iran to attack water desalination plants in Kuwait and electricity plants in Kuwait. And this is unacceptable. You know, Iran because this war has started by throwing the international norms and rules out the window, have decided that they also are not bound by international norms and norms and rules. And obviously, I place primary blame for this on Israel and the United States. But at the same time, as the Gulf now, we know that we should not depend on the United States. We should not depend on any actor outside of the Gulf to safeguard our own interests. And I think moving forward, there will be more discussions, more focused discussions that will occur between the Gulf states that share this vision in order to create this mechanism wherein they are not left out in the rain when it comes to future conflicts that arise and future negotiations that occur, especially when it comes to something as crucial as the Strait of Hormuz.
Well, certainly, Dr. Ali, Prof. Junaid, I see we've got a few minutes left. Just some final thoughts, and we'll ask Dr. Ali to obviously wrap up with his closing remarks.
Yes, sure. A wonderful discussion. One of the things that I think is a very positive sign, especially in a country like Pakistan, people forget that during the 1990s, arguably the most horrific levels of sectarian violence, Shia Sunni violence, was in Pakistan. And again, that was in some ways a result of the 1980s and the infusion of different theological orientations in Pakistan, Wahhabis, and whatever you. So there was a what has happened now with regards to the war on Iran. There were polls in many Muslim countries. I think Pakistan is at the top. Around 85% of Pakistanis are with Iran. In the past, this was unimaginable because the sectarian identities were so promoted by the state and the rulers. So these are some of the good signs that they see now very clearly who are the oppressors and who are the ones being oppressed. And the oppressed now is going beyond Iranians, beyond Muslims, but to the entire global South. So I think that this is a period that many of us have been waiting for, that ordinary Muslims in these countries who otherwise have not had that interaction with people from Africa, other parts of Asia and Latin America. Now they understand it. We have some of our Senator Mushtaq Ahmed Khan on the Smooth Flotilla right now. So these, to me, otherwise in an era of incredible violence and destruction, these are good signs for me.
Shukran for that, Jazakallah. Dr. Ali, final thoughts?
My final thoughts is that I think moving forward, I share that sort of optimism of Shia Sunni unity with Professor Junaid. I think when it comes to the Gulf, in particular, those sectarian tensions have been rising. In the context of Kuwait, the tensions rose, but then it was fought back against by Sunnis and Shia together. Saying that not just because someone is Shia, they accept Iran attacking civilian infrastructure in the Gulf. Certainly, I think this is still a chapter that needs further work. I don't know if I can put a blanket statement that it's necessarily been solved everywhere. Sectarian tensions still tend to rise in different areas in different ways. But when it comes to, I think, the path moving forward, I don't know if I share a very optimistic view, because at the moment, at least when it comes to the war, because at the moment, the reality on the ground really hasn't changed. The US does not seem like they're willing to accept Iranian demands that essentially mean that the United States will lose this war, on a political level. And this worries me. And in the same vein that we saw that within a couple of hours, we went from the US media reporting that the US is going to strike Iran imminently to the Iran and the US might agree on something imminently. Who knows? In the next couple of hours, we might see another flurry of reports saying that the US is going to attack Iran once again. And I think the longer the status quo goes on for, the more desperate the United States is going to be. And I leave this off. I stopped this with this particular moment in history that I don't remember clearly because I was not born at that moment, but at least from my reading of history, I feel like it is it signals a lot. When it comes to Pearl Harbor and the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, it was a stupid decision by Japan. It was one made out of desperation. But the problem is that they had no other choice other than to engage in that action because of the amount of economic sanctions that the US placed on Japan that caused them not to have enough steel to continue their projects on an industrial and military level. And what that led to is them feeling so desperate that they needed to do something, even if it was a stupid idea. And I think that Iran is not going to budge here. And the United States is not going to accept a negotiated settlement that gives them the short end of the settlement. And what this might lead to is the United States engaging in also another desperate action that is a form of escalation that resumes this war. I worry about this. I worry about the repeat of Pearl Harbor, though this time it might be the United States engaging in the attack rather than receiving it, unfortunately. And one final point, which is, I think that moving forward, we do definitely need to call upon and think more about how we can engage and promote those trust-building measures between Iran and the Gulf in order to create a more stable region away from the influence of the United States and away from the meddling of Israel.
Well, Jazakallah for that, Dr. Ali Al Sayegh, and also to you, Professor Junaid Ahmed, for a most absorbing discussion. I think there's just so much ground we've covered, and I'm sure there's a lot more we could have discussed, but unfortunately, time is of the essence. And once again, I'd like to thank both of you for taking time out with us right here with Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair. Salam.
Dr. Ali Al Sayegh and Professor Junaid Ahmed with us, and against the backdrop of the United States of America talking about the ending the fragile ceasefire. And again, there's just so much that one needs to take away from the discussion by both the academics that we've had as part and parcel of the panel discussion once again this evening. It's pity Ali Riza Kamandi, Tehran-based journalist, couldn't join us because it would have been quite interesting to get the Iranian perspective, but I'm sure at some point in time we will try and get hold of him. But for now, I'm signing off from myself in the team here at Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.